Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And welcome to my data presentation. I want to thank everybody for coming and sitting with us this afternoon. Before we get started with the presentation, I did want to do a few introductions, starting with our principal, our wonderful principal, Dr. Cloud.
I'm Dr. Brenda Cloud, principal of Kemp Primary.
Also, our grade chairs, beginning with kindergarten, Ms. Shepard.
I'm Erica Shepard, kindergarten grade chair.
First grade, Mr. Zarison, and we also have our cooperating chair, Ms. Nelson. Go ahead, Mr. Zarison.
Mr. William Zarison, first grade, other chair, and co-RTI SST.
Co-RTI, okay. Carrie Nielsen, first grade SST chair, and helper, Mr. Z.
And second grade, we have?
Errol Wilson, second grade chair.
We have our behavioral specialist.
Amana Thrasher, behavior intervention specialist.
We also have our school psychologist.
Station Collins Cooper, school psychologist.
And
Ms. Jenna Glazer, school psychology practice.
and last but certainly not least, my supervisor of the Ilead program, Dr. Lemons.
Chandra Lemons, nice to meet everybody.
What we're here today, or our purpose, is to look at a short-term project that I've been charged to do. And the wonderful thing about the project is that it goes perfectly with what we've been working on. Whenever you're thinking about implementing something or looking at a project, you want to focus on something that you are passionate about. And then you also want to make sure that whatever that project is, it leads to student achievement. Because at the end of the day, it's always about our students. So we'll dig right into the short-term project as I present the data analysis, which is to examine the effectiveness of the RTI process when properly monitored and its impact on student achievement. Beginning with our goals, we always want to make sure that whatever we do is in direct alignment with our district. So Kemp Primary will be in alignment with the district's strategic goals, the improvement plan, and the academic achievement plan. Also in alignment with the district, Kemp Primary will continue efforts to improve student achievement through interventions and professional development. Kemp Primary Goal 1, to continue to enhance the fidelity with which the RTI process is implemented. Kemp Primary Goal number 2. Kemp Primary will increase student achievement performance on the DIBELS assessment from the beginning of the year, or BOY, benchmark, to the middle of the year, MOY, benchmarks during the 2017-2018 school year. It's very important that whenever you are implementing or starting to do anything within your schools or in your district, that you have a strong team. And the team that we have working on the project is the best. I would say the best, not just in the district, but the best in the state of Georgia. The team was used to analyze the data from the grade chairs, the school psychologist, the behavioral specialist, our principal, as well as an assistant principal, which is myself. And then there's a rationale behind why the team was selected. So let's just take a brief look at the rationale. The rationale for the team that was comprised to analyze the data is as follows. Our grade chairs, they're very instrumental because oftentimes they set the dates for those RTI meetings prior to what we call our post checks. And we'll get into the meaning of the post checks shortly. They also conduct the meetings. They take minutes with the referring teacher. The chair also sends out reminders regarding RTIs and SSTs, and they make sure that the other members on the grade level are prepared by having all of their documentation prior to the meetings and prior to coming to the post checks with us. The school psychologist is an integral part of our team, and she's been here since the beginning of the year. She's worked alongside Dr. Cloud and myself, conducting many workshops on the process and also making sure that all of the teachers have the documentation that's needed. What she also does is she sits in on some of our post checks and gives feedback on their documentation about their interventions. She has also started her weekly power hour where she assists teachers if they have questions that may arise as they move through the tiers. Our behavioral specialist is an important part of our team. And you may be thinking, okay, we're talking about academics, but we also have our RTI for behavior as well. So she addresses those issues concerning behavior, but she also assists the team with identifying behavioral interventions for students who exhibit behavior or academic deficits. And as a result, that behavior is negatively impacting the student's achievement. So in addition to helping to identify the interventions and the progress monitoring tool that we'll need, she also conducts group sessions with students once I make the referral. The principal and the assistant principal. Of course, we are an important part of the team because we are the overseers of the process. So we meet with the teachers and the grade chairs 4 to 6 weeks, every 4 to 6 weeks, and go through the students' files. We're checking to make sure that the data is current. We're asking questions about the students in the process, or if there are any new students that are of concern, to make sure that all of the teachers have a clear understanding of the students' needs. But not also just that, they have to be able to articulate those needs, and they do that through what we call our roundtable discussions. The data for the project. There were 3 types of data that were examined, and those were the perception data, the school processes, and the student learning. And you all can take notes if you want. Feel free to take notes. I know you already know this, but feel free to take notes. So let's look at some of our perception data. Out of the 28 teachers who were interviewed during our roundtable discussions, 26 of the 28 were very positive about the implementation of the RTI process and the use of what we call our pulse checks as a checks and balances system. One of the 28 teachers stated that the pulse checks made her nervous and she didn't really feel prepared, but she understood that it was a necessity. One of the 28 teachers felt that we shouldn't have them every 4 to 6 weeks, that they should be less frequent, but they also understood the necessity of checking what we're doing. Out of the 28 teachers that were interviewed during our roundtable discussion, all 28 stated that prior to this school year, RTIs were implemented, but there wasn't a checks and balances system. There wasn't any accountability if the RTIs were not started on those struggling students. Now, it's important to understand too that RTIs are also a district priority, but you have to make sure that you have systems in place that are sound and that are consistent in all grade levels. So giving you another visual in terms of the narrative piece from the perceptions of the pulse checks, this chart looks at the kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, and the numbers, who felt positive, the teacher that was nervous, even though she knew it was necessary, just nervous, feeling like she was never really prepared for the pulse checks. And then the teacher that felt that they should be held less frequently. This next chart looks at the perceptions of the RTI process prior to 2017-2018. And it's in regard to lacking the accountability. Remember, there was something in place, but it wasn't consistent across the board, and there wasn't accountability. And then the numbers for that. And all 28 teachers stated there wasn't an accountability piece. So we wanted to make sure that that was in place this year. The second data point, our school processes. As mentioned in that previous slide, the RTIs were implemented in previous years, but not a real checks and balances system. Not having an accountability where RTIs were concerned if those RTIs were not started on struggling students. Also, teachers expressed that there was no formal process being followed throughout the school year until this year. So they were very appreciative about that. Now everybody, I think, was a little antsy that very first meeting, so they just trickled in, you know, slowly. But we also had a piece in place for that. That very first session, we did 2 sessions. So we did a session all day, and then for those teachers who weren't able to come because they had specials or they had computer lab, we stayed that afternoon and did a second session, which also speaks to the passion that we have about the process and how it should be done, and making sure that everybody has a thorough understanding. So now they kind of running there. They're ready. School processes continued. As a result, in the past 3 years, the effect of not having the accountability is students may not have moved through the tiers as needed due to insufficient data or a lack of implementation. Teachers also expressed that students continued to struggle due to the lack of proper supports and an effective RTI process. 25 of the 28 teachers stated that they felt having a systematic process in place would ultimately help our students to achieve success and make the improvements in learning that we so desire. So what does that look like? Whenever we get ready to have our round table discussions, or our post checks as we like to call them, they'll always have an agenda. So when the teachers walk into the conference room, the agenda is already there. You're going to have the welcome. We're going to welcome you for that day. Go ahead and tell you the purpose. We're going to discuss always the importance of RTI and SST. So that's always at the forefront of what. As we continue looking at the processes, we must begin with the agenda. So looking at the overview of what our post-check process looks like, we always begin with an agenda. When the teachers come in, it'll already be placed at their seats. We'll have our welcome, our purpose, discuss the importance always of the RTI and SST process and implementation. We also look and review the documents, make sure the proper forms are in their folders, the letters for Tier 2 as well as Tier 3. Now, one of the teachers requested that we have a letter, a formal letter, because we know that one is required at the Tier 3 level, but there's not one that's required at the Tier 2 level. But we wanted our parents to be on board at the onset and make sure that they were aware of everything. We wanted to make sure we were completely transparent. So I composed a letter for everyone to use, inviting them to be a part of the Tier 2 process, and that has worked really well. Then we begin with our roundtable discussion, teacher by teacher, checking the documentation, and then we always go ahead, give them the next meeting dates for the post-check. We were actually supposed to have one today, but because we had so much going on, we've moved that post-check to later in the month. And then, of course, questions and concerns would be at the end. Okay. In addition to that information, we wanted to make sure we had some type of order or structure. So this is provided to our teachers as well, the documents that are needed, that Tier 2 meeting plan or the Tier 3 SST plan summary, Document 2, the teacher meeting notes, Document 3, the intervention tracking sheets, Document 4, the work samples, Document 5, the copy of the intervention, Document 6, the behavior report card, only if it's applicable for those students that are having behavior issues. And we do have some cases where we have RTIs on students that have 2 deficits, therefore 2 interventions, one for behavior and one for academics. And then Document 7, a copy of that parent invite letter for Tier 2 or Tier 3. And they know that the most current meetings would always go on top. So now we're going to look at the chart that talks about the number of students in the RTI SST process by month. So when we're looking in the very beginning with grades, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, there weren't any referred in kindergarten. Now we always tell them to kind of move a little slowly with kindergarten. We tell our teachers that, and the reason is because the development is a little bit slower with our kindergarten babies. So we want to give them the opportunity to make sure that they're looking at and observing different things with that child, giving them that chance to develop over the course of the next few weeks, and months. And then if they're still seeing the same trends, to go ahead and refer them. In October for first grade, we had 20 that were referred, and then for second we had 10. For November, we did start to have some in kindergarten at that time. We had 9 in kindergarten, 24 in first grade, and 12 in second grade. In the month of December, still 9 for kindergarten, 30 for first grade, and then 18 for second grade. And December was a short month, so that's understandable. For January, we still had 9 for kindergarten. For first grade, we had 30, and then for second grade, 18. And then we also have some that moved through the process and moved from tier 2 to tier 3. So in February, for kindergarten, we had 8, and then first grade, 36, and second grade, 20. The next chart examines the RTI SST file completion by month. And this is very important when we're speaking to the process and making sure that everyone is held accountable. Because what it looks at is those that were incomplete, the teachers' files that were incomplete in comparison with those that were complete. So in October, you know, we had a kind of rocky start there. Remember I was telling you that earlier. Teachers were a little apprehensive about this whole process and coming in and getting their pulses checked. In October, we had 20 incomplete files, 20 teachers that had incomplete files, and only 8 that came with complete files. Okay, by November, 15 teachers had complete files and 13 incomplete. By December, 2 teachers had incomplete files, 26 had complete files. In the month of January, no incomplete files, all complete files, and in the month of February, no incomplete files and all complete files. So I was very excited about the fact that understanding the process really makes a difference. And you can see over time that all of the teachers got on board and came prepared with everything that they needed. And so we're expecting for this trend to stay and to remain. The next data that we looked at was the student learning data. So when analyzing the results of the Dibbles assessment from the beginning of the year to mid-year, there was significant improvement in grades K through 2 reading. Proper implementation of the interventions yielded increases on the progress monitoring reports and overall increases from the beginning benchmark to the middle of the year benchmark. Our results showed students moving from that intensive to strategic, from strategic to benchmark, and from benchmark to above benchmark in reading. We also noted the regressions as well, which you will see as we move through our presentation. So let's look at the story. Based on the findings, the data team found that there had been an increase in the number of RTI started and the number of complete RTI files from 2017 of October to February 2018. Looking at the data from the learning point or from the Dibbles perspective, when we look at intensive, based on the Dibbles reading data, of the 182 students that were intensive at beginning of the year, 98 remained. 31 students progressed to strategic, 28 progressed to benchmark, and 25 progressed to above benchmark. And I want to notate also when we went to the data meeting for the district, they were just in awe at the results from beginning to mid-year. So they were very pleased, the district was very pleased to see the movement, and we attribute some of that to our pulse checks. For strategic, based on the Dibbles reading data, of the 100 students that were strategic at beginning of the year, 16 regressed to intensive, 28 remained, 33 progressed to benchmark, and 23 progressed to above benchmark. For those students that started in the benchmark area, Based on the Dibbles reading data, of the 98 students that were benchmarked at the BOY, or beginning of the year, 5 regressed to intensive, 11 regressed to strategic, 42 remained at benchmark, and 40 progressed to above benchmark. And then looking at the above benchmark, based on the Dibbles reading data, of the 202 students that were above benchmark at BOY, or beginning of the year, 140 students remained, 57 regressed to benchmark, and 5 students regressed to strategic. As we continue to look at the data, we can also notate trends in terms of what that regression looks like, and what were the root causes of that as well. I know some of those were attributed to attendance. We had a lot of illness with that flu outbreak, so a lot of students were absent as well. And then some of the other outliers were different things that were taking place with students' families. This is just another visual for you all. It's the same information from the narrative. It's the visual for the mid-year reading Dibbles, the school's overview, looking at the grade bands and the progression, just in chart form. We also have the comparison as well from the beginning of the year to mid-year, once again in chart form, the same information that was given during the story, with kindergarten at the beginning and the middle of the year, first grade beginning in the middle of the year, second grade beginning and the middle of the year in reading. And the goal is to see blue and green. And as you can see, as we progress through the year, we're seeing less red, less yellow, more blue, and more green. And that always makes us excited. As we continue to look at the visual representations, this slide talks about the comparison from BOY, or beginning of the year, to MOY, mid-year. And it looks at those students that were well below, at benchmark, or above benchmark. So of the 51 students that were well below, we had 19 students that remained and well below, 12 students that moved below benchmark, and 12 students that moved to benchmark. We also had 8 students that moved to above benchmark. Out of the 40 students that were at below benchmark, 7 of those students regressed to well below, 12 remained below benchmark, 15 moved to benchmark, and then 6 of those moved to above benchmark. Out of the 29 students that were at benchmark, 1 student regressed to well below, 3 students regressed to below benchmark, 9 students remained at benchmark, 16 students moved to above benchmark. And for the 62 students that were at the above benchmark, we had none to regress to well below, 4 students regressed to below benchmark, 24 students regressed to benchmark, and 34 remained at above benchmark. Same thing for our first grade. Of the 72 students that began at the well below starting point, 34 of those students remained at well below, 9 students moved to below benchmark, 12 students moved to benchmark, and 17 moved to above benchmark. Of the 37 students that were in below, or started at the below benchmark, 5 regressed to well below. 7 students remained at below benchmark. 10 of those students moved to benchmark, and 15 moved to above benchmark. Of the 25 students that were at the benchmark point, 2 students regressed to well below, 5 students regressed to below benchmark, 6 students moved to benchmark, and 12 moved to above. Of the 71 students that were in the above benchmark, there were no students that regressed to well below, only 1 that regressed to below benchmark, 9 students regressed to benchmark, and 61 students remained above benchmark. And then looking at our second grade comparison, the 59 students that were there at the well below mark, we had 45 that remained well below, 10 students that moved to the below benchmark, 4 students that moved to benchmark. We didn't have any that were in the above benchmark. Out of the 23 students that were in the below benchmark, we had 4 students to regress to well below, 9 students to remain in the below benchmark, 8 students to move to benchmark, and 2 to move to above benchmark. Out of the 44 students that were at benchmark, 2 regressed to well below, 3 regressed to below benchmark, 27 students remained at benchmark, and 12 moved to above benchmark. And of the 69 students that were at above benchmark, we didn't have any that regressed to well below. We didn't have any that regressed to below benchmark. We had 24 students that regressed to benchmark, and we had 45 that remained at the above benchmark level. As we continue with our Finding the Story, we're looking at the priority questions that our team posed. So based on our school goal of enhancing the RTI process and achieving student achievement on Dibble's reading, the team posed these questions. How do we effectively monitor the fidelity of the small group interventions? And question 2, how do we ensure that the teachers have a thorough understanding of the prescribed interventions as outlined in the CCPS, or Clayton County Public Schools Intervention Manual? Because up to this point, we've been looking at the process, the RTI process as a whole, making sure that the teachers are coming in with the documentation that they need, making sure that the interventions are outlined and that they are specified for the students. But what does it look like in the classroom? We don't know. Is it being implemented correctly in the classroom? We don't know. That's still a question. So we want to answer that question. So the answer is a shift. We're shifting from process to implementation. Are we abandoning the process? Absolutely not. We're going to continue and extend our process with RTI. We will continue with our pulse checks and implement more things that go along with the pulse check. But now we're going to look at the implementation. What is that looking like, that intervention, when it's implemented in the classroom? So the team determined that we should include monitoring the fidelity of the small group interventions through teacher observations as a part of the process. Makes sense, right? Because you have to look at it. You have to see what's being done so you can speak about it. Also creating a progress monitoring observation schedule, and that's where teachers will be observed implementing the identified interventions. The other piece with that, providing immediate feedback. Feedback is so critical to teachers. So providing them with immediate feedback after observing those interventions. And then modeling the proper implementation of the interventions from the CCPS intervention manual. You and I can sit at the round table and we can pick out an intervention, but our idea of how it should be implemented could be completely different. Our idea of points for grumpy, our idea of the ABC awareness or phonemic awareness intervention can be completely different. So actually modeling what that implementation will look like moving forward is what we're going to. So we're shifting. Say shifting. The process over long term, what is it going to look like? We have to, for one, remember that it's not a sprint. It's a marathon. Slow and steady. So over time, we will analyze how monitoring the implementation of the interventions will enable teachers to become more intentional. You don't want to just do something. You want to make sure that what you're doing is intentional and is specific. As a result of the systematic implementation of the intervention, students will show more gains from the beginning of the year, or BOY, to the mid-year, or MOY, Dibble's Reading Assessment. And over time, there will be a shift in the role of the administrators. So we're now moving from overseers of just the process to overseers of the implementation of those interventions as well. Okay. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
motivation to actually take them to implementation. I think that's awesome. That's the key.
I have one question. It's for the staff, the teacher perception data. What instrument did you use?
It was interviews and we did tallies. So asking questions on a little reflection sheet, and then I did tallies according to how they responded.
Question. I'll ask it when the two of us are. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Are we excited, guys? Because remember, not just looking at the project, but the overall goal is to increase our students' achievement, to get our teachers and to other teachers in the district, maybe even across the state of Georgia, to understand it's not another task. It's something that you're already doing that's embedded, but it's more specific, it's more prescribed for that particular student, because you don't want to waste your time, and most importantly, you don't want to waste the students' time. So we want to be the model. You know, when we said that to you, we weren't just talking. We want to be the model for our district and even the state of Georgia with our processes and our what? Implementation. That's it, team. Thank you all so much.